Hello and welcome back to a road trip with Rachel. I'm Rachel and I'm excited to have you join me on this road trip. So, something I just wanted to sit and chat about. As most of you know, if you've been following my channel, like I work in admissions. So with admissions, the thing that really got me involved with it was the fact that I happen to be very passionate about pursuing Christian education just as a whole. My background, specifically, I've talked about it before, is I have an MDiv in Christian education, so I really believe in the importance of developing a biblical worldview, investing in understanding who God is and being able to love Him with your mind, and how that can influence what you believe and then how you live your life out, your orthodoxy and orthopraxy. I explained that in a different video, but like how what you believe is going to influence what you do, and what you do is indicative of what you believe. So with that, I just wanted to hop on and talk about like why I really think it is important for uh, particularly parents and churches to be encouraging their students to pursue higher Christian education and to look at Christian schools. Now, just as a quick disclaimer for this does not in any way mean that your child is a heathen or your students are heathens if they choose to go to a state school. Sometimes going to a state school for what they believe God is calling them to really is the best option for them. But a lot of the time, many of the degrees that students are seeking can be gotten through a private Christian university. And so I want to take a moment and just really talk about that, since I am an admissions counselor and actually a director for one. I'm also the product of higher Christian education. I did go to a junior college my first 2 years out of high school, and then I transferred to a private Christian university, and then I went on to a seminary that is owned by the Southern Baptist Convention. And the college that I attended, at the time, it was not affiliated with the Missouri Baptist Convention, but it now is, and it had been previously. So just as a quick clarifier on that when I'm talking about this. So whenever we're looking at higher Christian education, probably the biggest thing that anyone is going to complain about whenever we're talking about it is that private education in and of itself is just more expensive than public. You don't have your tax dollars going towards helping like educate the youth of the future, or anybody else. So tuition is going to be much higher, because those kinds of colleges and universities, they are going to be tuition driven, as is the university that I work for. Uh, and with that, one of the things you have to go in this with is that, is the cost worth it? And I would say yes, the cost is worth it, because I'm a product of that. And then I see students who are the product of it as well. So yes, whenever you are choosing to go to a private Christian university, you are making a monetary contribution to that. And that it is in some ways, it can be considered a sacrifice in order to go to that, because that does mean like either as a student you have to decide like I can do without this, or as a family you can decide we as a family can do without this because we think Christian education is so important. But it's also important that you don't only view it as like here's this bill that I have to pay. You also need to look at it as this is an investment, because those students that go to private Christian universities, or just a private university in general, over a public one, they tend to finish faster. So in the long run, it is actually cheaper. On average, if you go to a public university, it normally will take students, then this is the average, there's always exceptions to this rule. Average is exactly that. It's the average. It's not a diehard fact. But with an average, it takes about 6.5 years to finish at a public university. Well, Rachel, why is that? It takes it that long because a lot of students, you're going to be changing your major. That's just normal. Don't make your 17-year-old declare their major. Like if they want to come in as undecided, let them come in as undecided. But it is mainly because a lot of public institutions, because they are more open to having things like alcohol on campus, or there are not necessarily those structures that are always in place that will keep certain things from coming on campus. We all know, like, and it doesn't matter what campus this is. Hear me say that. It doesn't matter what campus there is. If a student wants to find alcohol and drugs, they are going to be able to find it. If they want to be able to have illicit sex, they are going to be able to do that and have that. But typically, with a private Christian institution, you're going to have a few more guardrails in place that is going to just make it harder to do that. And if it is hard enough, a student is not going to do it because it's too much effort. So especially like with schools that have like large fraternities and sororities, a lot of times that also includes a lot of frat parties and a lot of other parties that take place. And normally alcohol is going to show up as well as drugs, often, not all the time, but often. And because of that, a lot of students have a much harder time being able to know when to say no and being able to balance their studies with their social life. Because there's not all of those guardrails in place that make it easier to do that. And so it normally takes students longer because they fail more classes. Whereas with your average private school, it's going to take maybe a little bit more than 4 years, which means that you're taking a couple of summer classes to complete your degree like on time. Not that big a deal. A lot of students end up doing it. But financially, it's overall cheaper when you consider that fact. Like, let's just say, like, just to throw out some numbers, let's say a public institution that they are let's just say, like, and I know these numbers are off, like $10,000 a year. So if it takes you 6.5 years to finish, you're looking at $65,000 that you have paid now in tuition. Whereas if you have a private school that might be at like 20,000, it's double the tuition, but you're finishing it in 4 years. So you are paying still more money, but you are saving on time for that. And that's not counting all of the additional like nickel and dime things that you're going to end up being charged, which of course there's always going to be like additional fees and things like that, but that are just like you took a biology class, you have to pay like this fee. A lot of public schools, they have a lot of fees that you end up having to pay, so they will publicize what their tuition is, but they won't necessarily publicize all the fees. So you might see on paper, oh, well, I'm only paying 65, well, I'm paying 80 to go here. Okay, but that 80 is including a lot of other things, while the 65 is just the tuition. It's not counting all these other fees that you're going to have to pay. And so like it is a financial investment, both for the family that will pay off long term. Overall, students who go to private schools tend to have better job placement as well, and they tend to make more money because private schools tend to be smaller as well. That means they have more individualized attention. It also means that they're going to know who their professor is, not who their teaching assistant is. And because of that, it evens the playing field for those students who are wanting to go into specific fields, because those students are going to be able to get to know their professor, who is going to be able to help them network in order to get into those specific fields, where a lot of students who end up in the public spectrum, although they are able to get jobs and they have a good job placement rate, it is harder and is much more competitive, where it is much more the survival of the fittest. So those who are able to get in like early on and meet the right people are going to be more successful than the students who have a harder time learning how to network or adjusting to being in a much larger school environment. Secondly, that I think is really important is that it affects your student's spiritual life. Now, no one wants to hear the statistics that have to go along with students who leave the church. On average, and these have actually improved, when I was looking at going to colleges, for every 10 students that graduated from a youth group and like met the criteria to be like a college and career or to go off to college or join the workforce, only about 2 of them would end up staying in churches. That's really low. So like 80% of them left. Now we're down. I looked at 2 different studies. One said like 66% end up leaving, which means that basically like 6 out of every 10 students end up leaving. And then another just basically they said like 7. So if you take the 66 or the 70%, approximately like 6 to 7 students are leaving the church at this point. So that means you're keeping about 3 to 4 of your students. So not that there's anything wrong with like different like religious organizations that are on like different campuses, and like their mission is to reach out to college students. Things like FCA, things like Cru or the BSU, things like that. Those are great ministries, and we need those ministries. They need to be on all the public school campuses. I'm a big believer in them. However, they are reaching to the students, and it's voluntary for the students to come and to embrace that kind of lifestyle. Whereas when you are on a Christian campus, even if your student chooses to go there and they weren't raised within a Christian environment, there are still going to be those guardrails, and there's still going to be those particular requirements that are just on a Christian campus. I know at our institution that I work at, we have mandatory chapel. Like, that's it. Like, you're going to chapel at least once a week. And all of our professors, we are affiliated with the Missouri Baptist Convention. So all of our professors, even if they aren't necessarily Baptist, they do have to agree with the Baptist Faith and Message 2000. So, and they have to be able to integrate like faith into the classroom. So with that, I've talked about guardrails already. So instead of deliberately putting your child, if they go to a public institution, into a position where their faith is going to deliberately be challenged by people, and there is going to be active attempts to pull them away from the faith, whenever your student is on a Christian institution, especially if they are espousing the importance of having a biblical worldview, then those students are actually going to be, they are going to have those guardrails. They're going to have people who care about them, and they are going to be in an environment that is going to continue to foster them asking those questions and figuring out who they are apart from their family. Because, sorry, mom and dads, if you're a parent out there or a grandparent, I hate to break it to you, but when your child leaves, like, you cannot make them go to church. You can make them go to church while they are living in your house. You can't make them do that whenever they move out, and it is completely up to them if they want to do that whenever they go to college. I hate to break it to you, and I know that you probably made them go to church like all the time whenever they were growing up in your house, but it's their choice now. And so when you're in an environment where you have a lot of active Christians and you have churches that are involved on the campus, your student is way more likely to continue going to church. Their attendance might drop off a little bit, but it's more likely to be better, and they're more likely to stay actively involved. And I know that no parent really wants to hear that their child could very well end up going off the deep end and not like embracing a Christian lifestyle, or they could end up becoming apostate, which means they turn away completely from the faith, or they begin to embrace alternative lifestyles. I have heard that happening. I know several people that I graduated with who aren't actively involved in church anymore. And some of them, like, I would have never have guessed that would have happened. I mean, just being honest about it. And then finally, and this is for the churches, like, this isn't necessarily going to be for like the parents or grandparents or pastors. No, it is for the pastors, and it's for the people of the congregation. Pastors, youth pastors, you need to be encouraging your students to be going to Christian universities, because they're going to be able to get a good education. They're going to be able to get good jobs. And I don't know if anybody has told you yet, but whenever a student graduates from college, they've been actively involved in church and they get a good job, and they, most of the time, are going to go either back to their hometown, they are going to stay in the place where they went to college, or they're going to find a job relatively close somewhere else. You know, when you make that investment and you're encouraging them in that direction, you're helping the church as a whole, because those graduates who are going to go off and they're going to get good jobs and they're going to stay actively involved in church, you know what else they're going to do? They're going to tithe. They're going to be able to financially support the church. They're also going to want to volunteer, and they're going to want to serve. So they're going to be your new workforce, because I'm sorry, I'm a millennial, okay? Like, I'm turning 33 next month, and I'm on a soapbox right now, so I'm sorry. I'm turning 33 next month. Like, my generation, the millennials, the older millennials, I'm right in the middle of them. We are the ones who are now coming into like positions of authority within the church. We are the ones who are now heading up the VBS. We're the ones who are overseeing like the Sunday schools, and we're the ones who are soon going to be becoming the deacons and the elders and the children's ministers and the whatever you want to call them, directors. And then we can get into the whole pastor, director, minister like argument at a later date. But like the millennials are the ones who are now moving into those positions of authority, and the boomers, I'm sorry, boomers, like you're starting on your way out at this point. And we have our Gen Xers who are now like starting to move to where they're in more of like that we're guiding kind of phase of life, where they're helping the millennials like figure out what it really means to lead and helping guide them through raising their families and the whole 9 yards. Because the Gen Xers, your kids are getting ready to graduate from college. They're graduating from college now. So that means they're going to be now those people who are tithing and actively engaged in your churches. All right? You want them to come back and be actively involved in the churches. And even if they don't come back to your church and the church that they grew up with, you should want them to be involved in a church where they feel called to be, where God has placed them, and where they are able to actively be contributing to that body. If you are sending or deliberately sending your children to like public institutions, which, like I said, this is not a diehard rule, but most likely your child is not going to stay actively involved, and they're not going to feel the need to continue going to church because they're going to want to challenge the authority that has been placed ahead of them. And they are going to say, well, mom and dad just made me do that. I can make my own decisions now. I don't need to go and be actively involved in a church. So they might come back later on. They might not. But it is highly likely that they are going to stay actively involved if they're at a Christian institution that is teaching a biblical worldview, that is encouraging students to be involved in actively involved in the local churches, and they are inviting the churches to come and be involved on their campuses. That is a kingdom impact. That is an investment not just in your local church body for when the students come back as adults. It is also an investment in the church at large, because those students, they might one day go on the missionary field. They're going to go into the hospitals and the schools, and they're going to start businesses, and they are going to be able to reach people in a way that like the previous generations can't. So, my conclusion, I asked this: is Christian education worth it financially, spiritually, and with the church at large in consideration? My answer to that is a resounding yes. I believe it is completely worth the investment that gets made in it. And as someone who is the product of higher Christian education, and I could get on multiple soapboxes about this, both in the church and in formal education as well, that is my stance on it. I do think that there are times where the public realm is going to be the best option, not all of the time, and it's under very specific circumstances. I do believe we need missionaries who are actively engaging on our college campuses with BSUs and crews and college life classes that are there, and they're trying to reach those college students, because there are plenty of students who go off to a public university who come to Christ while they're there, and it's important that we be engaging those students. But we should not deliberately set our students up for the possibility of failure. And the word deliberately there is the key word. Encourage your students to stick to their faith and to nurture it and to be involved in churches in an environment that is also going to support that. And they're going to be teaching your students God's word and encouraging them and loving on them as they possibly can, and getting them involved in the local church where they can see and are free to question the things that they have been brought up with in a safe environment that is not going to make them completely turn away from it. Those are my thoughts. This was a rant because it has come up a few times here pretty recently in my life. So those are my thoughts on it. If you enjoyed this and hearing my rant, please make sure that you like and subscribe. I do like to try and read comments, so please go on ahead, let me know what your thoughts are, and I would love to have you following me so I can make more content like this. So thank you so much. Bye.